Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. This is going to be an interesting video. I'm going to do this differently than I've done any video before. I have some epic things to get to, some comments to answer about some of these things. Some of them are not negative comments, but things that people are wondering that I thought I would address. And I really wanted to get to these comments. I got most of them like 2 days ago. I didn't have time because of the speech with Trump and all that stuff, right? Today is Friday, March 7th. But I want to start with this. So there are times in history that there is a call for a great person, usually a great man because it's the way the things shake out. But someone has to be great. And in your life, sometimes greatness has to be there. Like you have to have your moments where you rise to the occasion. And most people fail in those moments, right? Where you have to go above and beyond what you thought you were capable of doing. Like circumstances push you into a situation where you have to rise to a higher level. And we are in such a time right now, right? And it's not really that kind of a time because divinity isn't backing the saving of America. This is not part of a divine plan where someone can rise up like in the Mahabharata or something like that. Some epic, story, some, these Greek tales or whatever, and rise up and, defeat the villain and, correct what's ever going on and elevate, humanity, right? And, because right now everything's about getting rid of this abomination, an ungodly and demonic system. And so he's the right man for the job, this guy. Right now, he's the right man to tank this system, run it into the ground, because that's what he's always done. So, if you want to call this greatness or doing God's will, I mean, he thinks he's doing whatever he's doing, whatever his motivation is, whatever's going on with him, it's not to make this country great again or great at all, right? And so Trumpers think he's like the hero, but he's really the villain. And so there lies the problem. And he's a villain in a sea of villains, where the opposition as villainous as he is, the Democrats and the liberal media and all the people. It's just all villains. It's all selfish, narcissistic, incompetent, short-sighted, villainous people, negative people, anti-God people that are coming together to take down a system that goes against the divine will, right? And so in all that, you got a guy who's, his followers think that he is something special. But if he was something special, he wouldn't do shit like this.
The United States will once again consider itself a growing nation, one that increases our wealth, expands our territory, builds our cities, raises our expectations, and carries our flag into new and beautiful horizons. And we will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
Okay, so that's complete bullshit, right? So first of all, he said manifest destiny. Manifest destiny is that God has chosen us, given humanity the dominion over the earth, which isn't true. We're supposed to be stewards. Thoughtful people, spiritual people, people who are evolved, look to take care of their less fortunate or less conscious creatures, right? Whether it be animal life or plant life. We have this wonderful planet, and we're here to help, store. We're here to help here to preserve it and to do things to enhance it, right? Make the world a better place. Every saintly person, every person who's worth anything, has some desire to leave the place better than they found it. Like every one of us should do that. In the Sajmark system, that's the bare minimum of a successful life. That's the starting point for success. Everything else is a failure, right? And it's not just in terms of the physical environment. nature. It's also your thoughts, your actions. Do you leave behind hate? Do you leave behind, animosity? Do you leave behind, negativity in some way? Like, what did you hurt? Whatever it is, right? Like the people that love you. What did you do to elevate people, to bring people to a higher level? So the bare minimum standard definition for a successful life in the meditation that I do is whether you leave the place better than you found it on every capacity. Your thoughts, your actions, your deeds, your energy, how you affected the environment, the footprint you left spiritually as well as materially. And if you leave it worse than it was before, then you failed. Your life is a failure. And everything else is a success. And then there's higher levels, right? But it's the bare minimum, just a little bit better. Did you leave the world a little bit better? And, even neutral, I mean, in this situation, not make it worse, right? But this idea of manifest destiny, you can go and fucking rape the world. That's what the Christians believe. Certain Christians, obviously not every one of them, the ones who believe in this, that are using their religion and their, this is the Queen of and the King of England. They were sworn in with this scepter and orb, which I showed you so much, which means they're God's representative on earth. You know that you have dominion over the earth. Whatever you do is God's will, and whatever you do to the earth is for you to exploit and do all these things. It is the worst attitude to have, especially for a leader. This guy thinks he's an emperor or king. He's a worthless piece of shit. We're going to get into it. There's two things we're going to highlight here after this. The debacle of that Gaza video, which there's so much more information about that. One of the creators of it, who was being interviewed, and then the fake assassination attempt, right? So let's listen to this part again.
Into new and beautiful horizons, and we will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
So he's lying to you because we didn't go to the fucking moon, right? I mean, I'd be shocked. There's things that I'm 100%. I don't want to say I'm 100% that we didn't go to the moon. I don't know what I am, right? We didn't go to the moon, right? Like, that's bullshit. We haven't solved the problem of the Van Allen radiation belt. That's been obvious. There's a video out there, a NASA video, where a guy is talking about a probe they're about to launch. And he said, this is going to be the first time we've gone through the Van Allen radiation belt, so we'll learn so much. Like, he says it in the video. And, you could say he misspoke. Oh, except for moon, but we lost all the telemetry data. But they're even making movies now, mainstream movies, where there's 3 or 4 of them out there where the moon landing is a hoax, right? And so if the moon landing is a hoax, then America is a joke. Like, that's, all of us who grew up in that era of the moon landing being the greatest achievement, if they fake that, then, America is a joke anyway, especially now. But I mean, so much of the deception and all the things with NASA and all these hardcore Republicans, some of them flat earthers, some of them, are not, not flat earthers, but many of us who don't believe in NASA and the NASA would lose all credibility if they faked the moon landing. And science would lose all credibility, right? That's the opposite of science. That's a fucking hoax, right? But our country's on the verge of collapse, right? And for him to say this, it goes against everything he's doing with Doge. So he's trying to trim the budget of $1 trillion. Now, going to Mars, unless there's frickin' a huge mountain of platinum or something on Mars, and we could actually, have the technology to bring it back, something, right? Like, there's some asteroid out there that's supposed to be made of, like, gold and platinum, right? Some big asteroid. It's like, this giant thing's floating around the universe, and it's filled with precious minerals, or whatever it is, metals. Raw earth. It's filled with raw earth. But if there's nothing on Mars that's harvestable, and we can't bring it back, like, even if we found it there, we're maybe 100 years of bringing it back, right? Something that would, change the fortunes of the American economy, something like that, right? like a huge asteroid of vibranium, like in the Marvel thing, in the Black Panther universe. But right now he's supposed to be balancing the budget, and it's just a lie. They're not going to Mars. There's no effort to go to Mars. Like that's, you know, you've even talked to NASA. Is this a Space Force thing? Like there's no plan. Does this have something to do with Elon Musk? Because it's going to cost like $1 trillion. So if you took away the waste, the $1 trillion of waste, the maximum amount that Doge can save America is $1 trillion. We're paying $1 trillion of interest every year, and then he's going to blow that $1 trillion going to Mars when there's no plans to do that. Like, we're not 4 years away, right? We're not, it's not happening. So what Trump has done here is at the end of this speech or at some point of this speech, there's some bullshit thing that they say, like we're going to cure cancer. Something that's not going to happen where they just lie to the American people and make it sound like, especially the people who have cancer or the people who are, have high rates of, a big percentages, like their family gets cancer and they're worried about getting cancer, right? Those people who cancer is a real prevalent issue, that they're going to cure it when there's turbo cancer because of something he fucking created with Operation Warp Speed. And so he put this out here because he's a liar and a bullshitter. And he lies about everything. And it goes against everything he's supposed to be doing, which is being fiscally responsible. Because going to Mars would not be a big achievement. People wouldn't watch it. People are going to believe that it's fake, even if, whoever it is and whatever's behind it. There's no one's going to give a shit, right? It's some fucking desert planet. There's no Martians on there. There's nothing like exciting about it. And people are so far beyond that shit, right? We've seen in scientific movies and science fiction movies and all these things, what we're capable in terms of illusion that we've seen. And it's just, something that you never trust anyway because of NASA's reputation now. Half the people don't believe that moon landing is real, a big percentage of them. Everyone has, lots of people have doubts about it, and it wouldn't be some spectacular thing, and they're not going to do it. So he's just fucking lying, right? We're not going to fucking Mars. And so in that, there's the shooting, right? Which we'll get to in a moment. Like, if we're not going to Mars, it would be a WWE fake thing that he does. And when he did the fake thing, the fake shot in the ear, it wasn't for the Democrats. He was scamming and faking and lying to his supporters, which he does all the time, because he doesn't care about you if you're a Trumper. He doesn't care about anybody, but particularly Trumpers, just in the sense that they love him. That's the only thing they have in common is Trump, he doesn't really love himself. You can't do that, but, whatever it is that this fake, what people call love. Because Trumpers don't really love Trump, but they what they call love, the praising him, their delusional perception of Trump is something they share. Trump's delusional perception about himself and these people supporting that delusion. And that's what Trump's all about. And a person like that is, everything that they do is a lie. If he's a grifter and a narcissist, and, their persona is a lie, and all the work they do with that persona is a lie. And they don't do great things because they're living a lie. They're lying to themselves, right? So let's go to this Gaza things next, right? Again, the framework of this thing is Trumpers think Trump is a great man, right? Like this attitude that Trump is some kind of wonderful person. We're going to get into the Barbie, the fake Christian Barbie. That he's doing great work and he's flawless and he's wonderful and he's just all these things, right? But he's clearly not. And so in that, he does really fucked up things, and this thing is like so fucked up. The Gaza thing, we've seen this thing. I showed you a bunch of times. What's next? And this whole thing, right? We're seeing this thing really bugs me on how bad it is. Like, it's just horrific. Like, this is, the bearded women, this is men dressing as women. Trump thing here. You know, this beautiful ocean, Trump dancing with thing, manna from heaven, the Trump Gaza, right? And Trump putting this out here because Trump's all Trump, Elon Musk, and these two fat fucks sitting by the pool, this whole thing, right? So in terms of crossing a line, Trump crossed the line with his whole policy on Gaza. I mean, it was a defining moment, just like RFK Jr. There's sometimes you're just on the wrong side of something. And there's no, whatever biblical bullshit that you believe in and whatever, chosen people fucking promised land stuff that you, Zionist views you have, which is wrong on every level. And then he posted this Gaza video, it makes it all much worse. As bad as this was, as much as it obliterates any sort of moral compass and moral line, his policies on Gaza. This video, which is so gaudy and so Trump and so WWE, so this fake assassination attempt, which we'll get to next. It's all these things, right? It was a representation of Trump being a grifter, and whilst he's dismantling the government, and this idea that somehow he's going to make America great again. This tariffs is a fucking disaster, and he's about to invest in crypto. $1 trillion. I've seen a couple of these crypto videos. He's going to the Bitcoin summit where America's going to start purchasing crypto to somehow, back the dollar, right? Where crypto is going to be the new currency and all these things that the American people aren't ready for, because when that happens, when you have to convert your assets into crypto, into Bitcoin, you're going to lose value. That's the only way they can do this. Where and these promises that they have for you are going to disappear. Social Security, Medicaid, these things you think you're entitled to. So, this video is symbolic of all that failure. Like somebody who lies and, is inhumane in such a way to the Palestinian people can't be a great man and can't do great things, right? Like he's not that guy. And he lifted this video without permission from people who aren't Trumpers. A bunch of my viewers told me about this.
And after President Trump shared an AI vision video for the future of the Gaza Strip, its creators are speaking out. I mean, you can see the video that shows things like a golden Trump, a statue, and a dancing Elon Musk. It's been all over the internet, so you've probably seen this. But the creators of the AI-generated clip say they don't know how it actually got in the president's hands. So let's...
The bearded men.
Bring in one of the creators.
Like he didn't have a problem with the bearded men, right? He just did this whole thing about getting men out of women's sports. But these bearded men, like either he didn't see it or he didn't, register it. I mean, it's just completely fucking wrong. This is the president is sharing.
Of the video, Ariel Vroman. Ariel, excuse me as I fix my mic pack that just fell off mid-conversation, but thank you so much for joining us. Walk me through this. What was your initial reaction seeing that video that you made for AI? And you and your co-creator have said you meant for it to be satire. Seeing it posted by President Trump and then getting this whole...
So it's satire, right? Like Trump doesn't even know it's satire because it had to be satire. And it's horrific. It shouldn't be made anyway, but like it had to be satire. Like it was a joke, right? So President Trump doesn't even know he's been, this is a person that's not a Trumper, and this is appalled by his position on Gaza, and made this gaudy video. I thought this would be something that liberals would share as a way to get at Trump and mock Trump, and Trump is like, yeah, this is great, like fucking, it's so fucked up, right?
Other life seemingly than what you initially intended.
Yeah, I mean. The whole story was pretty simple. I was in Vegas. We just heard the Trump announcement conference with Benjamin Netanyahu. And as I was looking at the window, I saw the Vegas Strip, and I was, calling my partner Solo Avital, and I said, "Hey, this is what's the vision of Trump to Vegas," and we're doing a lot of videos that we're testing in new technologies. And on that day, actually, we got a new tech called Arcana Labs, and they gave us like almost a test to test it overnight. We had 8 hours to test some new technology, and we said, okay, let's do a statement on the Trump Gaza idea, and it was a satire internally. We wrote it.
Jesus Christ, right? It's satire. Of course it had to be. Like, you know, I mean, this makes sense. Like, if it was liberals posting this, like, this is Trump's vision, how fucked up it is, how wrong it is. Like, you know, to put it into this thing. I mean, it's like horrific. Like, I'm looking at, like, this has to be a joke. And I'm like, well, Trump's sharing it. Must be his thing from his people. And these people aren't Trumpers. And they're using AI technology to generate these things. You know, a quick slap together video. He said they had 8 hours to test the technology. And Jesus Christ, right?
Put it quickly, and you know, the rest is history on this one.
What did you feed that AI software in terms of like keywords, phrases, to have it then come up with the images we see in the video? Was it Trump's words directly?
No. Trump basically, you know, he had an idea of where this Riviera is going to go. So, for instance, we just typed a prompt, you know, a golden statue of Trump is sitting in the center of the city in Gaza. And that's what it came with. So the idea is basically prompting those videos, and then the rest of the video was a normal post-production. We edited it, we color colored it, we did some sound design, and in the morning we watched it. I posted for 2 hours on my social media and immediately understood that it's not we're not a political company. We are completely creators and technology, and so I pulled it out. But I guess, you know, it got into some groups already, and then a month later we heard that the president has posted without
Jesus Christ, right? Like, somehow this made it to Trump, and Trump said, let's put this up. It's still up on Instagram.
context.
What did you want people
He
to
said without any context.
We heard that the president has posted without a context.
What did you want people to take away from that video when they saw it initially? And do you know right now how President Trump got access to the video?
Well, beside a few friends that we tested it with, we had no intention to show it to anybody. That's the paradox of this. You know, sometimes you're making an idea or a little clip or a little short, and it's internally, even if you're writing a song. Now, this is where the copyright, you know, comes in, because, you know, you're creating something. We have no idea how it got into Trump's hand. No, we had a few ideas, but we looked at it, and nobody that we know personally have access to the president's number or, you know, or to the White House.
Do you regret making the video, seeing the reaction that it has had subsequently? I mean, NBC News showed it to people inside of the Gaza Strip, and a lot of Palestinians were taken back by seeing it.
Of course they were. Holy shit, right? I mean, it's like horrific. It's one of the, like, you know, if you did this to, it would be like doing something like this similar for the Holocaust, right? Like, if you did this to Holocaust survivors, I mean, you would be considered a frickin', you know, one of the worst people in the world, right? You'd be like promoting Hitler in some AI way as some hero, and, you know, doing this with the Holocaust or any number of tragedies, right? I mean, Alex Jones got sued by the Sandy Hook families for saying a few words. Imagine if he did something like this, like, you know, people who are being traumatized, or, you know, are being a genocide, like war crimes, in this horrible situation that Israel's completely responsible for, and to mock it and say we're going to ethnic cleanse this place and turn it into a Riviera, right? And, you know, all these things that Trump said, which was horrific. I mean, just, you know, the worst thing he's done. And to make a video like this, right, that mocks, I mean, I don't even call it mocks, it's satire of how horrific this thing is, right? And then Trump lifts the video from you. And Trump is violating all these things, you know, that copyright and all the rest of it.
We're upset, saying it doesn't even represent our culture. Do you regret posting it?
Well, I regret that this video was posted maybe without a context. Now looking backwards, you know, it's definitely created a social conversation, whether about Trump vision or not. I think also about AI and creativity about AI, because, you know, in the end of the day, if you're thinking about any idea and you're creating an IP and you're creating something, you don't expect somebody to publicize it, at least without your permission or with the context or with the credit. So we didn't get any of that. So, right now you talking to me, it's actually,
Because Trump doesn't want people to know that this is a spoof. They're mocking his horrific position on Gaza. And he's like, oh, this would be great. This is exactly what I'm looking for. This is what, so gaudy, so WWE. I mean, I've talked about it now 5 times. Like, I'm just like stunned. Like, this is the invasion of Libya. Like, something just crosses a fucking line. When America invaded Libya, when all that shit happened with Gaddafi, all that bullshit, for those of you guys who know about that horrific war, and that, the information was coming out, and it was just a time for me where I was, investigating the UN and the UN's relationship, and, there was all these things going on that were, was where I was in my truther thing, and then see this bullshit war in Libya, and it just affected me differently. And this just crosses us, like it obliterates this line, like a moral compass line. I mean, this is immoral, this idea, what Trump's putting out there, and celebrating this, right? Manifest destiny. This manifest destiny bullshit, right? Where you can go do these things because it's God's will. It's God's will that the Palestinian people are kicked out of the Gaza Strip because it really because God promised it to Israel. This horrific God that's presented in the Old Testament, that's a demon and not God at all. The Old Testament's a piece of shit book, and it blasphemes God. It portrays God in a way that God isn't. It's not a side of God. It's not a wrathful part of God. God's none of these things. Like, anybody knows anything about God in terms of, the sophistication of the idea of an abstract energy that's divine love that manifests everything in the universe and keeps things, balanced and righteous or whatever it is, the higher nature that's within all of us, the soul that's within all of us, that this, being that they're calling God in the Old Testament is not God. It's a demon. It's a human, sociopathic, narcissistic piece of shit, right? And for them to embrace this idea that this is their land because a God that they, a demon that they worship said so, right? I mean, it's just, it's an atrocity. And Trump, let's wrap this thing up here.
It's something that makes us at least have our voice out and explain that was an internal satire that was not intended to be shown anywhere.
All right. Well, Ariel Vroman, thank you so much for joining.
Jesus Christ, right? Like, Trump isn't, he doesn't even, like, he doesn't want to acknowledge these people because it makes him look like an idiot for posting something that's a spoof, something that is, obviously there to mock his position on Gaza. Like, taking something that he said and showing you what it would look like. And him going, oh my God, this is great. Like, fuck. And the Trumpers just say, oh my God, this is great. Holy shit, right? What's fucking wrong with you? Like, you're fucking demons. Like, you're like, why would you like think this was a good thing? A lack of understanding or empathy or compassion for the Palestinian people. Like, holy fuck. This shows you what Trump is, right? We're not going to Mars. We don't have manifest destiny. And Trump's just a fucking idiot. And he's a moron and a bad person. And he's always been that. And he's a failure and a bankrupt person. And he's running the country into the ground. And you guys are like, oh my God, Trump's great. And, it's going to hit, reality's going to hit with the grocery prices and all the prices. He's going to destroy industries, right? My wife was telling me about, there's this area, Kentucky bourbon, bourbon, this industry of bourbon. And, people drink it in Canada. And they're going to lose billions of dollars in whatever, the bourbon industry. Because they're putting tariffs on it because of Trump's bullshit. And, they've gone to Trump, and some of these people are Republicans in Republican states that voted for Trump, and he's fucking them, these industries. Like, he's going to bankrupt these companies with his fucking bullshit tariffs that he's still going through with, even though he's taking a break on some of them because he just fucking doesn't want to look like an asshole after saying all these things, and then he's coming out as a loser, right? He's just throwing shit up against the wall. Let's go to Mars. Like, fucking, let's do this. Let's turn the Gaza into the French Riviera of the Middle East. Like, what the fuck, right? They're bad ideas that shouldn't be said out loud, and you're the fucking president, right? Which would, like, some part of me likes it because, shows you the president's position, and democracy fucking doesn't work, right? It's everything I say. But being right doesn't feel good in this. Me being right doesn't feel good, when we see what the effects are going to be and how fucked up everything is, right? So Trump is not a great man. He isn't a chosen one. He isn't a savior. He isn't better than Biden. He's none of these things. And he's empowered, and he's going full Trump, and the effects are going to start hitting us. Effects that he didn't even cause, because he's in charge of a collapsing situation. He's been in charge of a bankrupt company that was bankrupt in 2016, was bankrupt in 2012 and 2008. So the presidents either could contribute to it or delay it or whatever. They've all contributed to it. And then Trump's going full, let's just break this thing up. Let's just destroy America. And that's what he's doing. And Elon Musk is a big part of it, right? And all the Trumpers are complicit. Okay, so the next thing is this bullshit Trump assassination attempt. And I think most people realize that this thing seems totally sus now. But I was one of the few people to call this thing out, and maybe, to call it out as 100%. Like, I know 100% this thing's fake, right? If any of these other things are fake, any of these big kind of events we've had, the school ones, the whatever, things that we in the truth community believe are completely staged and fake, the moon landing, all these types of things. Like, if any of these things are fake, this thing is definitely fake. It was so WWE. And the reason I said I was one of the few people to call it out, because I was totally stunned, right? Because one of my viewers said that they watched 60 different truthers, like they were, researching this, and could only find 3. The 2 other people were doubtful. And I was like, this is fake as fuck. And I said it was WWE before I knew Trump had any kind of relationship with Vince McMahon, before I knew that 4 days later Hulk Hogan and that dude from the kickboxing guy, MMA, got up there, whatever his name was, the guy who introduced Trump, Dana White. Before I knew Kid Rock was going to be there, all this bullshit stuff that was going to happen, I knew this was WWE. It looked like a WWE event, and all the things that I called out. And it was just obvious. I knew immediately when I saw him. I saw that he was bleeding in the ear and he did the fight thing. I knew that was fake. He went for the fucking big kahuna. The fight thing. And again, he did the fight thing in his address, but they downplayed it because they knew if people started to really talk about it, it would become obvious that it's fake. He's got no wound on his ear. He didn't get shot in the ear. He does nothing. There's nothing there. There's nothing here. He didn't get shot in the ear. And it's coming back up, and he wants to push back against it, right? Because I'll show you 2 video clips, and people are starting to talk about it again because he brought up the fight thing, and it's just coming around. Why aren't you doing something about this? So here it is.
Peter.
But based on what you're saying right there, the lack of information and the data points that you just gave, does that make you think that there's some part of that there's some bigger?
It could be. Well, it makes other people think that. It makes me think it a little bit too. I say, when you have 3 apps and 2 of them are foreign, and you had an FBI that wouldn't report on it, they didn't want to say why, I would say that could be suspicious. And then...
Okay, so Trump, if he hears a rumor that they're eating the dogs, he'll come out and say, oh, they're eating the dogs. When there's just any kind of an inkling of some kind of story that involves a conspiracy against him, all the stuff they did, the January 6th stuff, all of it, Trump fed into all of it. The election denial, him being an election denier, this stuff, him being robbed in the election. On flimsy information, Trump went public and posted things about how he was being conspired against, right? Every time he was attacked by the media, every time he was sued, every time there was charges against him, everything that was done to him, he's the worst. Nobody's treated. They treated me very badly. They conspired. These groups conspired against me, right? And then they try to kill him. He's like, I don't know, maybe there's a conspiracy here, right? Because he knows it's fake as fuck, and he knows that it's probably pretty easy to figure out once people go there, right? Like, nobody's talking about this because the people who are truthers were fooled by this thing because they were so desperate for something other than Biden. and most truthers lean right. And so, if this was happening to Biden, the whole truth community would have said it was fake as fuck, right? 100%. Like, there's no doubt about it. Anything similar to this. But with Trump, they bought into it. Here he is. He has a penny up here that he's gotten rid of. Like he's no longer minting pennies. And so like he's saying, well, maybe other people would say that, but not me. Because if there's a conspiracy, the Secret Service have to be involved. And he knows the Secret Service the way the Secret Service failed on so many big points, even Morning Joe was pointing it out. They let him pop his head up and do the fight thing. I mean, they didn't even look like real Secret Service. They looked like a movie, WWE Secret Service. Like people pretending to be, part of that thing. But, untrained and allowing the guy to, his head exposed for another headshot, like in a 1 minute walk to the car. I mean, I've showed you the video clips before. I mean, so much. Like, I've gone through this so many times. It's so fucking fake, right? And he knows it. And he knows he can't call it fake because all the people who would be complicit are people that were conspired with him to defraud his followers and, perpetrate this fraud on his followers. And so they're his allies in this. So he can't shit on them because they could just say, oh, yeah, if they came to it, they're like, yeah, we faked it, right? Like if they're being thrown under the bus, they'll rat him out, right?
You have 3 apps and 2 of them are foreign. And you had an FBI that wouldn't report on it. They didn't want to say why. I would say that could be suspicious. And then on the second assassin, you had, and by the way, I have to tell you.
Okay, so it's not an assassin because neither one of them killed anybody, right? And so the second guy, these aren't professional hitmen. There's people who are disgruntled. I mean, there's no information about the first guy, and they shot him dead, and we'll get into that. There's another clip here from New York Post. We'll get into that in a second. But there's no information about the first guy and the second guy, and they're not covering this. And people say it's the media not wanting to cover this. Trump isn't making a big deal about this. Of all the things he's doing to unravel the government and everything, every stone that he's turning over, every rock he's looking under, him and Elon Musk, this is the one thing that he's like, well, let's nothing to see here, folks, right? Because it's fake as fuck.
The Secret Service did a great job on that by spotting him. But on the second one, he had 6 cell phones. That's a lot of cell phones.
That's a lot of cell phones for one man to have.
And a couple of them had some strange markings on them. So, yeah, I want to find out. And I would be willing to release it. I mean, maybe there's a reason that we shouldn't, so.
Yeah, because it's fake. That's the reason. The reason, you look at how he's low energy about this. He can't he can't just totally poo-poo it away, but he's not like, there's no energy. He has no energy for this thing. Everything he's saying here, it's just like to pacify the Peter Ducey.
I don't want to get too far ahead of my skis, but yeah, I would be very willing to.
When your skis are a fake assassination attempt that you perpetrated on the American people.
Release that, I'd like to see it. I want to see it myself.
I want to see it myself. You know what? Somebody tried to kill you, and you're not looking into it, right? Like, even if it was you're brave as fuck, which you're not. Even if you're okay with dying, which you're not. Just for your family members who are also under threat because of this, right? Your family, or everyone in your family, or you're the only president that can stop the country from collapsing. So you need to protect yourself. I mean, in your worldview, so it would behoove you to actually figure out what happened. You haven't looked into this, like you're so. I mean, somebody says boo to you. Somebody says the least amount of insult to you. And you're like, and then all the other more severe things, the criminal charges, the lawsuits, the accusations. I mean, he's over the years, like, you wouldn't let Rosie O'Donnell slide for saying something, mildly truthful about you. I mean, all the things that he's done over the years. Somebody claimed that he wasn't a true billionaire, and he sued the guy, and the guy won. A reporter, because Trump didn't want people to think he wasn't a billionaire. He has this thinnest skin of anybody. And they try to kill you, and you're not interested. I'll get around to that. fuck you. Like, you, what a lying piece of shit, right?
Not only you, I want to see that one myself.
I want to see that too. I do. I really do. No, it isn't fake at all. Okay, so look at this fucking guy right here, right? They're saying that this guy was able to sneak. You know, he brought in a I forget what the device is called. You know, it's a distance measuring device. And don't tell me, don't care, don't need to know. I can look it up. You know, like a viewfinder to figure out how long the shot was to the stage from where he was sitting. And where he allegedly took the shot, I showed you in the simulations they provided and the video, you know, the pictures from the area, that he didn't have a direct line of sight shot to Trump at a perpendicular angle where he could, you know, shoot it straight past his ear. That would miss his head, but only clip his ear. He didn't have that shot. He would have, to hit his ear on the right side, the guy was off to Trump's left. He needed to be perpendicular to take this shot that would just graze his ear. Like Trump went for something where he went with the WWE bleed, you know, red is green, where the guys would cut themselves because they would get paid more money, because bleeding was great, you know, was for the act. And they had all these guys with scars for razor blades that they kept in their wristbands where they cut themselves, and then, you know, they would bleed in this whole thing. It's part of the, you know, the ugly, greasy part of the, you know, the whole WWE. Again, he hired Vince McMahon's CEO of the WWE to run his school department, education, which is fucking insane, right? But they're saying this guy snuck in with all this equipment, past security, climbed up on this roof, stared down cops who were climbing up on the roof 5 minutes before he allegedly took the shot. And, you know, he was masterminding this when they know almost nothing about him, no political beliefs. And he was later killed, and with this whole fucking narrative, right? Look at this guy. You think this guy's some criminal mastermind, assassin, some 18-year-old kid or whatever he was, right? Who didn't even have strong political leanings. And again, you know, this is the official story. Look at the fucking guy.
Was Thomas Crooks, the would-be assassin of Donald Trump, part of a larger criminal network?
There were others assisting Thomas.
And does one private investigator's claim of an electronic device still pinging at his old high school have any merit or implications? Plus, those close to Crooks say public narratives about him are all lies.
It still baffles me now.
My findings
Whoa, Dana Kennedy.
in Western Pennsylvania almost 8 months later, right now.
Did he act alone? Of course not, because this was something that Trump orchestrated.
On July 13, 2020.
Look at this guy. Do you think this guy could pull an assassin by himself or with a group of people, could pull off an assassination attempt on a former president campaigning? Come on. Come on. Like, we know all these things. You know, people, like this guy can't even tie his shoes. Look at this motherfucker.
24, a seemingly mild-mannered college kid almost altered the course of human history when he shot Donald Trump at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania.
So you see where he was, this head right here? Like where Trump was looking.
He shot Donald Trump at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania.
See, he looks like right there. And the guy would have to be perpendicular. And the guy was over here. He was, you know, he was up top over to Trump's left. The bullet would have came from this direction. And so, like, just the logistics don't work, right? The guy didn't have a proper, like, he didn't have a laser pointer or whatever. He just had the sight that came with the rifle. He didn't have a scope. You know, he wasn't he wasn't, you know, he never killed anybody before. It was just silly. And that thing, the fact that Trump made it that he hit his ear, like, Trump wanted the blood. He wanted to get up and say, fight, fight, fight. He wanted to look like a tough guy. He wanted to make it WWE. He went for too much, right? He didn't need to do any of this because he would have beat Kamala without it. And they already were rigging it for Trump. Unnecessary. And, you know, Trump said he looked at his hand. His hand was covered in blood. It wasn't. He gets up. There's the ketchup's already dried. All the things I've showed you. It's fake as fuck. There's nothing legitimate about this. The way the Secret Service behaved, the whole thing was like obviously a staged, poorly staged, you know, for dumbass people who buy WWF stuff, WWE stuff. And so Remember, he said he looked at his hand and there was blood.
Pennsylvania.
Trump said in multiple interviews that he looked at his hand and there was blood all over it, and there was none. And then when he came back up, there was no blood on his hand. There's a little bit of ketchup on the back of his hand, like a drop, like a little bit of nothing. And all the ketchup was dried when he got back up and the Secret Service laid on top of him. So his account of it was wrong. The guy didn't have a clear shot to his ear. The whole thing looked fake and staged because it was fake and staged. It was really bad. Like, it was just embarrassingly bad. Then he rolled all that shit out, the WWE stuff with Hulk Hogan, Dana White, and all that bullshit that he did at the convention. And he got to say fight, 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 and look like a tough guy. But if he was a real tough guy, he would them take out a chunk of his ear. He went to the hospital, and the guy said it was a 2 millimeter cut. But Joe Rogan confronted him, said there's no scar. And Trump's like, there's a little bit. Then he wore that giant patch over his ear, his whole ear, when, you know, he eventually just showed up with a little Band-Aid at the top of his ear. And when he took it off, there was no damage. His own doctor said he didn't need stitches because the blood had already dried, the ketchup had already dried, and he didn't get hit. And if he was smart, he would have had them take out a chunk of his ear that looked like a bullet hit it, and then it would have been harder to dispute. But he's such a pussy, he wouldn't commit, right?
But to friends, neighbors, former teachers, and investigators, why Thomas Crooks did what he did is just as much of a mystery now as it was back then. Videographer Matt McDermott and I spent a week in Butler, Pennsylvania, and nearby Bethel Park in a sometimes wild journey to find out what really happened.
Yeah, come on. If you're a real investigator, you say, you'd pose the possibility that this is a staged event, right?
After all these months, the trail is as cold as the ground that you see.
My kids used to call somebody like a name, you're being a butler. It was but with lure on the end of it, like it just...
In front of me. The motive remains unknown. Why?
Because they let this thing die, right? They let this fucking thing die. You know, because it's not a real thing. And so they didn't look into it. You know, they know everything about everybody except this kid. And it's always the case in these fake events. You know, these kids and the people who know them are saying, you know, a totally different person than they're being portrayed. And I don't understand how this happened. And, you know, they said he had a manifesto, but they still don't, you know, it's the whole thing. Remember, whenever they release a manifesto, that's fake. Like, people don't write manifestos. The CIA writes manifestos. When CIA create a patsy for an event, there's always a manifesto. And it's like these guys all, you know, do the same thing. Like, they're all part of some secret club, some secret group of self-selected people that do shit like this, and they all write manifestos. I mean, how many times do you hear a manifesto? Like, it's like 90% of the time. Because CIA thinks that's a good thing to put in there because it just, you know, and it's the way they drop information. Like, day one, they know this. Day two, they know this. Remember Luigi, this kind of thing, that guy Luigi. You know, they spoon feed you. It takes them a while to get to the bottom of it, the way they release information. And so each day there's a little bit of information to keep the story going. But I think they realized this thing was such a debacle and it looked so fake, and Trump went too far, like he always does. Like a normal person, it would just be like assassination attempt. But Trump had to get up and pump his fist and say, fight, fight, fight. And he was mouthing the words. There was a microphone right there. You didn't hear him say fight, fight, fight. He did the same thing when I showed you when he announced Slim Shady for president, and he was saying shady, shady. You could see him mouth the word shady with all the other fans of Eminem were saying shady, but he was just mouthing the words. It was like a performance. You know, he was acting, right? Trump acting.
What we found shocked us. Even though Thomas Crooks killed one rallygoer, Corey Comparator, and seriously injured...
Again, this isn't the actual picture. You know, they're saying this was him right here, and he had the shot at Trump. When there was a billboard here. You couldn't see the guy. This whole thing was blocked up. These people were, to be perpendicular to Trump, these people were sitting perpendicular to Trump. This is not an actual photograph of where the guy was, right? And the Secret Service had this guy in their sights. They see a guy on the roof with a rifle, and they choose not to shoot him, right? Which Trump admitted to. And so, if a guy's got a rifle on a roof and he's pointing it at the president, they shoot him. He was up there for like 9 minutes.
Injured 2 others while grazing Trump's right ear. There's a lot of sympathy for him in his hometown of Bethel Park. Several people told us they don't think Crooks acted alone and that he might have been a patsy. Some also accused...
He looks like a patsy. If you're going to put a picture of a guy next to the word patsy, it would be him. Like, he looks like a patsy.
Biden's
like, this guy's voted most likely to be a patsy.
FBI of suppressing some information, like why Crooks' body was cremated so quickly, and
like it's Ben Laden. They threw him in the ocean.
what his overseas encrypted accounts revealed. Private investigator Doug Hagman
Look at this guy. Look at Doug Hagman.
had a team of 7 working on this mystery after being hired by a secret client shortly after the event.
Secret client.
He says his team used a technique called geofencing. Hagman told me they located 8 or 9 devices, probably cell phones, that belonged to other people, but were pinpointed to being with Crooks at his home, at his old high school, at his gun club, and even at the rally.
Boom.
Hagman said he doesn't believe Crooks acted alone and that he was part of a criminal network that's still out there.
Yeah, that's what's happening. And they're not, like the government and Trump aren't making this happen. Some goofy private investigators coming up with this info, right? There's a New York Post video.
And still wants to kill President Trump.
Yeah, I'm going to say that I think there's sufficient evidence to support the conclusion that there were others in assisting Thomas Matthew Crooks, based on the presence of electronic...
All the available data would show you that this thing's fake. The multiple failures by Secret Service, the failures by the counter snipers to take out a gunman that they saw. They were looking right at him and had him dead to rights, and they let him fuck around with a rifle on a roof for 5 minutes. The fact that he took a shot or he pointed the gun at police, and there was a police failure, they didn't secure the roof, which had direct line of sight to the president, right, to Trump. The fact that they let his head pop up, and the fact that the fake blood was dried, right? There was no real damage, no stitches, no real cut, nothing. Trump wearing a big ass bandage and milking the thing for everything it was worth. The fact that it happened right before the convention, and all the things that went with it. I mean, his convention was bolstered by this event, right? There's so many things that were fake about it, and the cover up and the failure of different agencies, police and FBI and all these things, right? It was just a debacle on every level. And Trump's a lying piece of shit. Like, he has no credibility. And he's a grifter. And so all these things, right? I mean, there's nothing here that would make you think this is real.
Devices at his home as well as at the Butler Fairgrounds.
But to all his neighbors, Thomas Crooks seemed like a regular teenager.
I mean, he seemed like a normal kid. He seemed nice.
It's Kelly Little.
Sit up, he'd wave and smile, every day.
Gonna go take a shot at the Trump at the rally today. Like, see you later.
Around, so it's not like he was like a shut-in or anything like that. Seemed like a very normal teenager.
Everyone we spoke to pushed back on the narrative at the time that painted Crooks as a Columbine-type loner who wore camo to school, was bullied, and even supposedly threatened to shoot up his school once. They told us that was all false. Crooks' former guidance counselor, Jim Knapp, knew Crooks and his parents and older sister since he was in 9th grade.
Do you remember where you were when you heard the news?
Sure. No, I don't. The kid who was my former student took a shot at Trump, and it didn't leave an impression.
Thomas Crooks had tried to kill the person who'd become the president of the United States.
Sure did. And it was like, are you kidding me? I said, this kid I would have never, ever thought would have attempted this or never would have done this.
Crooks' former computer technology teacher, Xavier Harmon, was one of many who told us Crooks was not only a very gifted student, but a nice kid. Harmon said he called Crooks, quote, his little buddy.
My little buddy.
I didn't believe it. I know the individual I taught and this individual, this picture there, presenting of and somebody who was a total 180 of who he was in my classroom.
His Bethel Park High School friend said you can never really know anyone, but still said he was shocked at learning what his old economics classmate did.
This kid that I played football with, like, sent me a message. He was like, "Do you know Matthew Crooks?" And I was like, no. And he was like, "Oh wait, Thomas Matthew Crooks, you graduated with him, right?" I was like, "Yeah, what about him?" And he was like, "That's who tried to assassinate Trump." I was like, "Get the heck out of here, dude."
Get the heck out of here. He's Joey Strong. He's pretty Joey Strong, this guy. You know, like, fucking just stop. Like, it's just embarrassing. So Trump faked assassination attempt, is claiming we're going to Mars while he cuts the budget, which is a complete lie. We're not going to fucking Mars. We didn't go to the moon. And if we didn't go to the moon, we can't get to Mars either. Because the same problems we had getting to the moon exist going to Mars, right? And all the things that are involved with that. And, you know, this whole thing with the Gaza thing. I mean, it's horrific. This guy is a worthless piece of shit, liar. And now he's cutting all these, you know, we'll get into the terrorists here in a moment. But he's doing fucking all this damage, right? It's so fucking bad, right? I mean, he's a nightmare. And, like, he's going to bring this country down. A country that's already collapsing. Like, he's, you know, he's the steward of the collapse. He's the, you know, he's the face of the collapse, right? It certainly isn't his fault that the country's collapsing because we have a demonic system, but he is the, you know, the epitome of what's wrong with America. He's the epitome of what's wrong with this era. Trump is the poster child for, you know, this kind of asshole narcissist that, you know, manifests destiny, that forces their, you know, their twisted reality on the world, manifesting, you know, bad shit and not even enjoying it. And ultimately being a person that acts so irresponsibly that goes bankrupt and destroys everything in their wake. He's a toxic loser, piece of shit that is going to, you know, be the face of the apocalypse. You know, like, it's just that simple. Let's get to the, let me go to the comments. I want to talk about some comments and then get back to on the other side, I want to get to the tariff stuff. Okay, so most of these things, this is going to be the, a part of the 183rd or 84th edition of the Journey series. Let me look this up real quick. I think it's going to be the 183rd. Yes, it is. I'm going to make the other one public today. It's Friday, March 7th. And so most of this is going to be about the spirituality stuff, but it's going to tie in this stuff with Trump. And, you know, being able to assess what's real and what's fake, and then just being honest about, like, not being able to know certain things, right? So I'll start with the two that aren't about the spiritual stuff. And somebody wrote this to me. I've seen your videos in the past that thoroughly explain the economic system. So how do you mean the country is going bankrupt? It's always been in a debt-based system. And as for paying down the principal, we wouldn't even want that because that would mean less money in circulation, right? So this person is saying these things that I've said in the past. And so what he's talking about here is we have a debt-based economy and we're trading debt. We're trading IOUs. I mean, our currency is an IOU promise to pay, and debt is being valued. You know, people are betting against debt with the credit default swaps. And if you got rid of all the debt, we would have no money. If you just had the printed currency, which is worthless, right, which is the debt itself, it would only be 5% of the buying capital. You know, people get loans, which is debt, cheap money. Like all these business guys on Shark Tank, they don't invest their own money. So when they make a deal, they don't take some money out of the bank. They go to these businesses, they go to these banks. In fact, one of the Shark Tank guys said, you know, I think it was that guy Damon, he was, you know, competing with Mr. Wonderful for a deal. And he said, you know, we all go to the same 5 institutions, same 5 people for money, right? They go to these bankers, these banksters, and they get cheap interest loans based on their signature. This is what Trump did even after his bankruptcy. And they're able to invest this money that's debt and really no risk to them. And if they default on it, you know, there's all these other ways that they turn that into value, right? And so I've said before, if you paid down on the principal of any of these loans, that you would have no currency because our debt is what's valuable. And so the person saying, how can I be saying that the country is bankrupt? A better way to say it is it's insolvent, right? Because, when your liabilities, this is what happens to a bank. When the liabilities, right, the things that you owe, your debts outweigh your assets to such an extent, like they'll talk about being exposed. You see it in the movie Margin Call, and also in the Big Short, that that being exposed, and they have this risk assessment, and if their exposure was beyond reasonable limits, we better sell off. And this one sort of computer genius guy figured out that they were way overexposed and that everybody else was on this credit default bullshit, and they needed to sell it off, and that's what they ended up doing. And there was no good way because that created the market toppling. They went first. Remember if you saw the movie Margin Call, the CEO came in and said, you have to be smarter, and I'm not smarter. You have to be, you have to cheat, and I don't want to cheat. And so you have to be first. These are the three things. You have to be one of these three things: smarter, cheater, or be first. And he said, let's be first. And so they all sold off all their bullshit debt to these other banks and these other institutions, and they created a complete collapse and lack of faith in the, they were announcing that this isn't worth anything, right? And so the problem we're having as a government, which is this person doesn't remember this part of what I said, is that you have to make it look like you can pay off the loan. Like it has to be within reason, right? You can't have $1 trillion of interest that's going to be $2 trillion of interest. You can't have all that shit, right? Like at some point the debt gets so bad that, people start to panic, institutions start to panic. China might dump the American dollar because they don't want to lose all its value. The China's buying the dollar like we're buying Bitcoin as a way to sort of backstop have something of value. Because it's those stocks and but all the bonds and things, the U.S. bonds, Treasury bonds, they're going to be worthless, right? This happened years ago when England beat Napoleon, and there was a person that came back, like somebody who was at the war front. They didn't have communication devices, and some person who was supposed to relay the information came back and said England lost, and everybody sold their bonds. Like England was considered broke, like them losing to Napoleon. England was was fucked, and they sold all their bonds. And the Rothschilds, one of the Rothschilds brothers, bought up all the bonds, and then it turned out England won, and that guy became the richest man in the world, the Rothschilds family, and the rest is history. All that stuff to do with Israel, all these other things. He's a Jewish person. And all the Rothschild stuff that's, the conspiracy about the Rothschilds. And that happened. Like there's two movies. One is it's made by Germany, which is anti-Rothschilds, which is a much more believable one. And one is made by Hollywood that's pro-Rothschilds, and it's just ridiculous. Like he said he bought the bonds even though he knew, he didn't know, he bought the bonds just to save England because he was such a loyal patriot to England, right? But he had word that actually England won. Like he had better information, and he was able to buy the bonds up knowing that all these people, and he might have sent the bad information to the people. And so like the whole thing is, this is what I'm talking about. So there's a point where the debt is so like fucking ridiculous that there's no way that you can have faith in the American economy or the American government. And that's where we're at. We're insolvent, right? Bankrupt is another word for it, but we're like in a sense always bankrupt because it's a debt-based system. But you have to make it look like you could possibly pay it back. That there is a way that America could pay back this loan. It can't grow to this extreme, like they're just printing money. And so the inflation gets too high, and eventually America loses loses its ability to lie or be considered solvent, and the world bails on America as the world reserve currency, and then inflation, the American dollar gets so devalued that you're spending $100,000 for a loaf of bread. That's happened to the economies where people have to take wheelbarrows full of cash to the grocery store, and they have to pay $1 billion of $1 billion or whatever their currency is for like a loaf of bread. Like, it's crazy. This has happened to countries that their currency gets so devalued, and that's going to happen to America. So that's what I'm talking about, right? It's, they can't fake it anymore. And they really can't. They couldn't fake it 10 years ago, but now it's just ridiculous, right? Like Elon Musk is saying, we could trim $1 trillion off the budget. Well, you're still $2 trillion in debt, right? And $1 trillion of interest. So, like, what are you doing? You're $1 trillion. You're trimming $1 trillion off, but you still have $1 trillion of debt and $1 trillion of interest. And then all these unfunded liabilities that aren't part of the budget, we're spending far more than we have as an income, right? If our income is $5 trillion and we're spending $8 trillion a year, that's $3 trillion of added to the deficit each year. But then there's these unfunded liabilities that aren't a part of the budget. So America's spending like $10 trillion a year. And we're going to have to spend more. And like, he wants to go to fucking Mars, right? And so this is what I mean. Like, the economy, at some point you can't fake it anymore. You can't fudge the books. I mean, this is how Ponzi schemes and pyramid schemes collapse, because like, it just gets ridiculous at some point. It just gets silly. Okay, so there's a weird, I think this is the one here. And so this is an old video, Britney Spears starring in I Don't Look Crazy. It's a short video. So this is one of my short videos where I mock Britney. And so this young lady, who, is obviously not one of my normal type viewers, fine, your cute voice, I guess, sir. Fine, your cute voice, I guess, sir. We all came here for her, though, for Brit, in capital letters. No, you didn't. Like, the people who come to my videos come for me to mock Britney, and, I don't do it anymore. I'm not close to doing it, but, I mean, it's just something that's probably in the past. It's fun to do, because she's crazy. So that was a great one. And so then this one, so there's a bunch of this stuff on spiritual things. Some of them have to do with, all this stuff to do with my spiritual organization collapsing, right? And so it says here, have you ever been asked what you think about the message Sadhguru has been sharing? Have you ever listened to Sadhguru? I believe Theo Vaughn interviewed Sadhguru on the podcast this past weekend. Sadhguru is a scammer. There's a lot of fake gurus in India. Small ones, big ones, popular ones. Some of them have some charisma. Some of them, they all have to have some charisma. Some of them they're smart. They might, they have some ability. And some of them have some spiritual success. They've been able to develop a little spiritual success. They have a little insight. They have a little knowledge. They have a little, talent. But they're materially oriented, and they are running a fake scam, a for-profit scam. And this is what's happened to my thing, right? And Kamesh Patel, which I'll get into in a moment, had real spiritual talent. Like, he was somebody who was good at doing Sajmar. Better than me, at least in terms of my understanding of it. He was more committed than I am to the system. Like, he loved it more. He put more energy and effort into it, right? And so there's a comment about this. I'll get to that in a moment. But in terms of your spiritual, your spiritual approach, there's two things. I've explained this over and over again. There's spiritual condition and there's spiritual approach. There's lots of people who were simple people, Aboriginal people, all the Native American type people, Aboriginal people in Africa, different places, and in Australia, pure people who were one with the land, one with nature. They have good spiritual condition. They're very pure of heart, village-based people, simple people, farmers, right? But they didn't have a good spiritual approach. They really hadn't started their spiritual journey. they, you know, they had some relationship with divinity, but mostly they were in tune with nature, in tune with Mother Earth, right? And they were, you know, they were good at being human beings. They were doing what human beings were designed to do, but they hadn't begun a spiritual journey where they had connection with the divinity within them, and they started to move along their spiritual yatra, and so they were still at the first point. They were at the bottom of the ladder, and hadn't taken that first step, that first rung, which is what Jesus did. Like Jesus was only at the first rung of his spiritual journey, which isn't a knock on him, because it's far above the average person. And so all these people were Aboriginal, had good spiritual conditions, but had no spiritual approach, right? And as you gain spiritual approach, you can fall like chutes and ladders. You know, you have to climb up the ladder of spirituality, and you're like, you know, eating shit, you're fucking, you know, you're struggling, gravity's trying to pull you down, and you're climbing up the mountain. But when you fall, when you go down a chute, a slide, you know, chutes and ladders, it's tough to get up the ladder, but it's easy to go down the chute. And so many people, so many higher developed souls went up to higher levels, and they became something, and then they turned into a fake materialistic, fake guru, right? They lose their connection to God. And so Sadhguru is one of these. Like, I don't know all that much about him, but he's very performative. He acts like a guru. And where you are spiritually is where you are. There's no bullshitting it. Like, Trump's a bullshitter. You know, he gets up, he says, we're the best people, we're all these things, right? You know, the way that he brags, oh, we're doing the best job, it's the biggest, the worst, the best, the worst president in history was Joe Biden, the best one is me, you know, this kind of, you know, rhetoric. You can bullshit people about business, you can bullshit, you know, you can have a PR team, you can hype yourself up, you can, you know, do fake shootings, assassinations, you can do all this bullshit, right? But where you are spiritually, you can't bullshit your soul. You can't bullshit God, right? You can't look inside yourself and pretend you're at a different level than you actually are, because there's no material reward, right? Like, you can lie about being something that you're not and get material, whatever it is, but if you're a spiritual person, you are where you are, and you are who you are, right? And it's hard for people to accept, and that's being a spiritual person. You know, there's people that were calling me master. You know, when I started the Gratefullness meditation as a way to salvage some of the great Sajmark system that had been such a blessing in my life. And I'm like, I'm not a master. And they're like, well, that's, you know, you're just being humble. And I'm like, no, like if you saw an actual master and then you experienced me, you would not think, you know, like you're doing it based on never having experienced someone who has mastered themselves and is 100% committed to God. Which I'm not. Like, I'm not, you know, I'm doing my best to preserve something that I love and to help, you know, salvage whatever's left of this system and keep it alive, and, you know, whatever I can do. Like, it's limited, and, you know, I'm happy with the outcome, but I haven't been able to recreate what was here when Master Charji was alive, right? Or when the other masters were alive. You know, Kamish Patel failing, I haven't been able to do that because I'm not, you know, I haven't mastered myself. I haven't been given I haven't given all the tools and abilities I would need and character qualities I would need to pull that off. And I'm not, you know, legitimately being charged with that. That's not my assignment. Like, I'm not, you know, like, nobody would give me that assignment. Nobody in their right mind, because I'm not really built for it. And I don't want it. Like, you know, if I was offered it, I'd be like, nah, no thanks. You know, I mean, nah, no, it's not, you know, thanks, but no, right? Because I know what it entails, and I'll get into that in just a bit. Let me get into this other comment. And so this is what I'm talking about with Trump, right? Like, you just have to, you know, in your own life, you know, be honest with who you are. You know, like I've said before, people are scared of the darkness within them. We all have darkness. We all have a dark side. We all have an ego. We all have our, you know, potential, you know, being a demon. We all have our potential of going wayward against our soul and God and divinity within us and taking a demonic course. And we all do it to a certain extent. And people are scared of the darkness inside of them, the evil inside of them. But they're even more scared of the potential saint, because that's like really scary, because you have to give up everything, right? Like all the things that you like, all the things that, that all your addictions, all your negative tendencies, all these things, you would have to give them up, and you'd have to serve God, tirelessly commit to serving God every second of the day, and all your full capacity, and you'd be given more and more work, right? So let me read the work one here. That's the I don't know where that one is. I think that's here. And so this person writes, so I said that in the Sagemark system, the reward for work is more work for God, right? That when you're a soul, a disembodied soul, you don't need a rest. You don't need a vacation. You don't have a body that you're lugging around. You don't have the stress and the cortisol and all the shit that that's all the bad stuff that you're dealing with, all the toxins, all the negative people. You don't have to shut down and glitch out and go to sleep and reboot yourself. You can just keep on going because you're a soul without a body. And so the person says, I don't know, God needs to do a little better job. Can't just do all the work and reward your employees with more work, no promotions. That's what makes your employees quit. And I think that's where human beings are with a relationship with God. Bad guys win in the world, and it's no secret. Hope you review this comment. Well, you got your wish. And so they're misunderstanding what I was saying about the reward for work is more work. Because when you do these spiritual sittings, these these meditations that I talk about, that are available on the Gratefullness meditation, YouTube channel. When you're a preceptor and you do this work, you get a 20% commission of the transmission. Chargy used to say, because Chargy was a salesman. Chargy was a salesman in his business life. And he said, as a salesman, where do you get a 20% commission, right? You just don't. And so you retain 20% of the transmission, and the transmission feels good. So there's a reward. But then you also go to higher levels and a higher spiritual approach, so you do get a promotion. You do higher level work, then you need powers, and you need to be at a higher level of consciousness. In your spiritual approach, you get closer to God. And so the higher level your work is, the farther you have to evolve to do that work. And so that's the true spiritual path, where you commit more and more to God, and you take on more and more of God's work. And when you do that, God takes on your work, right? God takes care of your family. God takes, everything is you have these divine beings that are around you, making sure that you're protected in your health and watch over all these things, because you're doing God's work. God's taking care of you. You're an asset, right? You're somebody who is aligned with the divine forces, so everything works to your benefit. Like you're completely surrendered to God, and everything that is around you, everything in your life is God's. And so the more you do for God, the higher up you have to be. So you are promoted, and you have these experiences. When Master Chargy was being trained by Babaji to be the third master of the system, like he had these entries in his diary where he was given a sitting by Babaji, and he went into this vast blue, like he was just sitting like in this floating in this this vast blue energy field, some deep blue indigo energy field, right? And he comes out of the city and he's like, Babaji, what was that? He goes, oh, that was eternity, right? Today you experienced eternity. Like you have these experiences and things that God opens up to you, and these secrets are revealed to you. The price is that you commit more and more of your energy and your thoughts and everything to working for God. And your ego doesn't want to do that. Your ego wants to indulge in lowbrow, low-level shit and mundane things, and be just have the human experience. And you have to give all that up. You have to give up your freedom of choice. You have to give up all these things to work for God. All your indulgences, all your letting your mind wander, all your victim consciousness, all your, poor me stuff, all this stuff. You have to give that up. You can't waste your time and energy indulging in selfish thought and selfish pursuits. You have to use all that energy and all your thought force to do God's work every second of the day. Like that's what a master is, right? So when people say, Paul, you're a master, I'm like, no, that's, like I know what it takes. I know the kind of commitment, or like I get a sense of it, and I haven't made that kind of commitment, right? I haven't made that commitment to divinity. And, in terms of the work that was done with Sagemark's system, these people would, all of us would go to see the master of the system and go to our group meditations and our individual sittings, and our inside, spiritual system, our condition would be cleaned. Whatever we were doing, whatever mistakes we were making, whatever indulgences we had, whatever addictions we had, whatever things, they would get cleaned out. And then we would go out and do them again, right? You go out and do things that were hurting your spiritual condition. You would feel the grossness that you would be creating grossness by choice. And then you would go back and the master would clean you. And the second master of the system, Babaji, felt like if he cleaned people enough and transmitted to them enough, at some point they would just get it and they would give up all their lower tendencies. And it just didn't fucking happen, all the way to the extent with this thing with Kamlesh Patel, which we'll get into in a moment, who was given the ability to be a master, and he chose the low road, right? And so Babaji underestimated people's addiction and, desire to go to the lower side of themselves. Embrace the lower instead of embrace the higher. And maybe over a series of lifetimes, which hasn't happened yet, they'll finally get it. With enough cleaning and enough transmission, they'll finally give up their tendencies. But, as far as I can tell, it really hasn't worked because people have a predisposition towards the lower. And so knowing that, so when you're a preceptor, you transmit to somebody's internal condition and you pull the grossness out. You either feel the grossness, you see it. As made a preceptor, there's this guy who was very visual. He had some amazing experiences. He had taken care of Babaji. He was a Canadian chiropractor and nurse. And he had taken care of Babaji when he had poor health. And he had, had all these experiences. Very dynamic person. And I had been made a preceptor, and he told me the first time he gave a sitting, he closed his eyes and he saw this room, which was he was giving the sittings to this woman, and there's a door, and he opened the door, and sewage came out of the door, like that. He was having this visual image, and it poured on him for a half an hour, and he was like, "Well, this is horrible." And he went to Babaji and said this experience, and Babaji said, "Well, did she look better? Was her face glowing? Did you see light in her system?" He said, "Yeah, she looked like she had just been completely relieved." Because the sewage was just dumped out of her heart, right? And Bobby said, "Well, good, you did a good job then, So that was part of the work. And so what you're doing is, it's like, imagine sitting there, and you're in a room, and you're going through the mental process of sweeping the room for like a half hour or 20 minutes, and there's transmission that's there, so you feel good, but that's what you're doing when you're cleaning people's hearts. It's like doing some cleanup job. It's like scrubbing a toilet, but doing it, imagining it, right? And doing it with your eyes closed. And so it isn't, there's not a lot of fireworks. It's just mundane work. And you give sitting after sitting, cleaning after cleaning. Like, I was a preceptor for, 4 or 5 years, and I wasn't that busy of one. And it's just, some of the work's unpleasant. You're diving into somebody's grossness. And again, it doesn't hurt you, but you're there seeing it, and you have to clean it out, and then transmission comes, and you feel good when the transmission comes. But it's a commitment. And then when these people go out after you've done this service for them, and they immediately make bad choices, unspiritual choices, and they come back to you, "Can you clean me again?" It's some revolving, this revolving debt of this, paying paying the interest or paying the minimum payment on your credit card as the revolving debt grows, like our economy, instead of the people taking active interest in not creating grossness. And people know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. There's plenty of teachings about it, but they already knew. And they just didn't want to give things up. And they expected, they're treating the master like a toilet. Like they're treating their hearts like a toilet, right? Because that's where the grossness is accumulated. So anyways, here's the final one here. Let me see if I have. Okay, so here it is. This person's responding to me talking about Kamlesh. "Paul, why was Kamlesh Patel allowed to happen? Why was he put forward only to then go and actively destroy the system?" Well, I don't know the answer to that question. Well, this is my theory. So the other masters of the system, Lalaji, the first master of the system, there was no organization. He took no donations. He lived in a small town in what's called Fatehgarh in northern India, a small poor town. where there wasn't a lot of spiritual people. They had some Muslim people, some Sufis, masters that Lalaji interacted with. And people came to his house, and there wasn't the system that now is the Sajmarg meditation of cleaning and transmission. He transmitted to people, but he gave people mantras, he assigned them things, and they would just come and he would impart his spiritual training. He didn't get paid, there was no money changing hands, there's no anything. I mean, it's always been that way until Daji. And so, it was just totally grassroots. And then he died and didn't have a successor. In every religion, every spiritual organization, the idea that the master of the system, and this is very prevalent in India, can leave behind a quality disciple to continue the work that's on the same level as the master. Like you think about Jesus leaving Peter in charge of his church. Of course, St. Paul was very prevalent as well. But the idea is that the essence of this spiritual achievement would be passed down. That's what the Pope is supposed to be. The Pope is there's that thing called the Conclave. If you've seen that movie, these movies are very interesting. The idea of what happens in the Catholic Church, but, it's degraded into, just corruption and politics and pedophilia and all the scandals and all of it, right? Because the Pope doesn't have the essence of the Christ in him. Each succeeding disciple would have Jesus in him. Jesus would merge in him, right? This idea that the master merges in the disciple. The soul of the master is now a part of the disciple, right? And the disciples walking around, and when people refer to the master, the Sajmarg system, they're referring to the previous person, right? The previous person's soul, his spiritual achievements. And that's what Sajmarg is about, where there's been this achievement of the central region of merging in God, and this person who's merged into God, now his soul is in this elevated position, and his soul merges with the disciple and brings that disciple to that level, and that disciple creates another disciple and merges in him, and that disciple is brought to that level, right? So there's a desire in all these spiritual traditions to execute this, execute's probably the wrong word, but to facilitate this connection where you would keep the Christ alive, you keep the master alive, right? The essence of the master would then merge in a disciple, and the disciple would have that as their, would be their soul, would be that soul, or that, would be this, whatever it is. So I don't know how you would frame it, but there would be, this essence inside of you, this awakened divinity within you. And when people came to you, you would have your ego, and your ego would have to get out of the way and allow this essence that's called the master to come through. Like Master Charji said, I never thought of myself as the master. He didn't call himself the master, I'm the master. This is, the master was Babaji's soul that had merged in him. And so for Charji, he kept this meticulous diary. And Charji would travel with Babaji to Europe and these other places. And there wasn't so many people. There was about 5,000 people worldwide. There was, 100 people in Denmark and, 10 or 15 people in England and, 100 or so people in France and maybe a couple hundred of people in America. And they would go to these countries, and Babaji would talk to people. Charji would do interviews because Charji was, a more polished public speaker. And he would go with Babaji and sort of explain Babaji to these various cultures. Charji was more Western. He understood the Western mentality. Babaji was just a sweet, loving person. And he would speak in very short sentences, like he wasn't educated and he wasn't, he was almost like a Yoda-esque like figure. And while they were traveling, Babaji was really sick. This is in 1974. It was his last trip around the world. He was like, after this, he was never the same physically. And they were in an airport in Copenhagen, Denmark. There's all these people, Danish people, small country, right? A country of like 5 or 6 million people. And there was a number of people there, and Babaji just loved them, like he loved the Danish people. And there's a lot of them that I see, when I used to go to India. Nice, sweet people, like really, some of them I'm still Facebook friends with, but I talked to quite a few of them, and they're just really great people. And they, so they're traveling, and they're in the airport, and Babaji said, let's have a meditation, a sitting. And the sitting lasted for 1 minute and 40 seconds. And Babaji said, I just transferred my condition to you. I just merged in you. And then he died 9 years later in 1983. And Charji was his appointed representative, and Babaji finished training him during that period of time. And Babaji's health failed. This guy Don Savarin, I talked about the sitting earlier. That guy, the Canadian guy I talked about. He was taking care of Babaji during that time, right? Babaji just had poor health until he died in 1983. But this mergers happened, and Babaji had been Patanjali, the father of yoga, Patanjali's 8 limbs of Ashtanga yoga, and in a past life, and Charji had been his disciple in a past life. Like, there was this connection, and Charji had been St. Paul in a past life, so he had done this work before. He very much did what St. Paul did for Christianity. He said that St. Paul saved Christianity. If there had been no St. Paul, Christianity would have been absorbed and wouldn't exist. And so, like, he did that administrative work. He was this brilliant guy. He was a CEO. He ended up being a CEO of his company, spoke all these languages, built all these ashrams. He was just good with people. He just understood cultures, and he was a great public speaker. And he worked tirelessly. This was the person that said the reward for work is more work. He would take on work, and he would get more work and higher level work, and keep on being promoted until he was master of the system, which he himself was not really psyched about, because he understood the sacrifice he had to make to become master of the system, right? There was a time that Babaji said that he had reached this higher level, this higher position, and he was in the central region. He said, well, can I die now? And Babaji said, what do you mean? He said, well, I don't want to fall. People have these spiritual falls. And Babaji said, well, I didn't make you for you. I didn't do this for you. I helped you get to this place so you could carry on this work, right? This noble work that, is part of this divine plan. And in your case, it won't happen. You won't fall. And that's key to this thing with Kamlesh Patel. So as Charji got older, there was this idea that he had to find some person that he was going to merge with and carry on his work, right? Carry on the work of the masters, the Sajmark system. And so, give this sitting that he had received, like where his essence would merge in a disciple. And so he picked this young guy who not too many people knew. He was a second generation Abhyasis. His parents had been practitioners. He was tall. Charji's like a 6'2", 6'3" guy. This guy was like maybe that tall, or he was younger, so maybe a little bit taller. And he came in and he traveled with Charji, and he said some things that upset people. And Charji had these inner circle of wealthy guys who, he said Babaji had created better jobs for them than they deserved. A lot of them went to America and got really good jobs, made millions of dollars, and donated money to the mission, and were in administrative positions in organizing the system. And Kamlesh Patel was one of them. Kamlesh Patel had 7 pharmacies, and I had these spiritual experiences, which I talk in the Journey series. I saw Kamlesh at the airport. We were waiting for Charji. I turned around, I looked at him, and I read his spiritual condition. I was like, oh my God, he's in the central region. So I thought of him in high terms. Like, I thought Kamlesh was a good Abhyasi. When he became master of the system, I saw that, he had that master. He had the same spiritual condition and approach that Charji had. Like, I'm like, oh, he's the master now. So, Daji was amongst these people. And there is a guy I call the Daji Truther who says that he's talked to people who are part of that inner group. Charji came out and said, these guys are the worst of the worst. There's this talk. Many people have listened to it who do the meditation they've heard about it from me. One of them sent it to me. I already heard the talk. And he said that these guys are the worst character. They're rude. They're entitled. They're totally a bad reflection on the mission. I mean, all the things. The worst possible things you could say about these inner circle guys. And I talked to one of these inner circle guys who's I consider a really good, higher developed person. And he said he was there, because I brought that up. And he said he was there with all these other people. And he felt mortified that Charji was saying it. Like, he took it personally. And he felt like a piece of shit. And he goes down to breakfast, and all these other arrogant assholes, these successful businessmen, doctors and, hotel chain owners and things, they're patting each other on the back like nothing happened. They're laughing, and they're not even affected. And Charji said, I tried to chastise them. I talked to them. You do whatever spiritual work so they'll wake up, and they just won't do it. And so these guys turned on this young guy who's Chargie's successor. Plus, Chargie was a Brahmin from South India, and this guy was from Kolkata, what used to be Calcutta. So he was from northwest India, and so he wasn't part of their caste. He wasn't a Brahmin caste member. Brahmin is a caste of educated people, and oftentimes gurus that sometimes they're politicians, and they have those kind of they're educated people, and they're in the south of India. Oftentimes, they produce a president or various like high level politicians and doctors, and lots of them are gurus or spiritual people. And they're very prejudiced and they're very elitist, and they rejected this guy. And they threatened to kill him, and they threatened his family, and he really wasn't taking to it, right? And so he quit. He withdrew his name and said he didn't want to be successor. I'm watching this thing called the Daba Cartel on Netflix, and I'm like on the final episode. I'll be on the final episode by the time you hear this. I've watched it, and it's so fucked up, and I want to talk about it separately. But there's things about the Indian culture that I see there, and the caste system, right? They all call these people sir. This is sir's wife, like a guy who's under a guy, who's his boss. He said he'll be introducing his wife to this wife of his boss. This is sir's wife, He refers to his boss as sir, in various ways that don't make sense, right? And there's this hierarchical thinking. And, I was there's these really nice brothers who lived in Chicago. I think one lived in Chicago, one lived in California. And they're from India. They just really had the good energy. And the one in Chicago helped my family. We flew out of Chicago one time. Mostly we flew out of New York. But we flew out of Chicago to go to India. And he helped us get, we stayed at somebody's house and, that wasn't there. Somebody maybe was in India. Like, he was really helpful. And the guy was really nice and sweet. Every time I talked to him, he was really, helpful and checking in on me and the family. See, when we were in India, I think this guy's just a really, great person. And there's these people who volunteered to do cooking, and some of them are like less educated, of a lower caste, but they're volunteer people. Even if they're getting paid, they would produce snacks, and they have this little snack bar type thing, little cafe at the ashram, which made it really great because you could get this food. Sometimes they serve sandwiches, and this guy starts berating one of the people, talking to him like he's a fucking dog, right? And I've seen this over and over again. These people who are higher in a caste, and you're talking to them, and they're like the nicest, sweetest people, and then they're like a total fucking arrogant control freak, controller prick, as they degrade somebody of a lower caste. And Chargie had said, get rid of your caste names, and a caste is a plague on your spiritual growth. But it was there. And so, some years after this young guy who had been nominated to be Chargie's successor had withdrawn, I missed morning group meditation, which was at 7:30, and I was going to eat breakfast at the cafe. And I was sitting out there waiting in line, and there was this nice guy. He was a well-dressed guy. He always wore a tie. He was like, he was clearly more educated than the rest of the people that worked there. Nice person. And just really, devotional and really wanting to contribute something to the organization. And this guy who had been nominated as Chargie's successor and had withdrawn cuts in front of me. And, it takes me a lot to, want to slap somebody. It happens very infrequently. He cuts in front of me. He starts yelling at this guy, berating him. And I'm like, oh, it's a good thing you didn't become successor. You're a piece of shit, right? I was like, this guy's just a fucking asshole. There's no reason for him to talk to this person like this. This guy's volunteering, and the guy's totally apologetic and humble and, whatever. And, so this guy, I'm like, he wasn't a good master. And I thought I had thought of Kamlesh at good terms then. Like, Chargie had just passed away, and Kamlesh was just now the master. So I was like, well, we dodged a bullet with this guy, right? Little did I know that Kamlesh was going to be a total piece of shit. The other piece to this is that people tried to kill Babaji when he was named Lalaji's successor. Now, Lalaji did not announce Babaji's name. Lalaji died, and for 13 years he intercommuned with Babaji. And Lalaji only had about 200 people that, did his meditation that came to his house. And there's no official organization. There was no money. There was no properties. But just from the powers that, the spiritual powers, the spiritual, gifts that he gave to Babaji, that Babaji needed to do this work, a bunch of Lalaji's disciples tried to will him to death. They tried to steal his spiritual powers. It was a whole thing, right? Like Lalaji had seen that there was a guy in his village, and the guy had developed the ability to hug people and steal their spiritual, their spiritual accomplishments. And he saw him do it a bunch of times, and he went up, and the guy tried to hug him, and Lalaji took back all the things he had stolen. The guy realized it immediately and begged him to give it back. He said, "No, you can't keep what you're stolen, you fuck." That's why I added that part. So there's this, essence. And believe it or not, like you can believe that, I don't care if you believe this stuff or not. I can't verify it, but this is these stories, right? And so, these souls tried to kill Babaji, and they were punished. There was a whole thing that happened with that. When Charji was nominated, there now was an ashram. There was 5,000 people worldwide, and there was donation money. And all these Babaji people, including Babaji's family, didn't accept Charji. They poisoned him, which Charji ate the food anyway because he wanted to prove to them that they couldn't kill him. And he was poisoned, he suffered some physical effects from it. And some guy showed up and tried to kill him, amongst other things. Like there was court cases, lawsuits, all these things. There was a lot of drama, and Charji went through the fucking ringer. And it helped him, I think, humbled him, where he, tried to do his best to make sure Kamlesh didn't have that happen. But the issue was that Charji was such a bigger-than-life person, such a competent person, that nobody was going to replace him effectively. And somebody wasn't going to be able to be compared to him. And Kamlesh developed some jealousy instead of, and I don't know if Charji merged in him. I don't know what happened. But Charji went into a coma for like 3 or 4 months. He was really sick. And everyone thought he was going to die. And a year later, he nominated Daji. And 3 years later, he died. But Daji himself that said Charji wrote his name down on a piece of paper as his successor and then crumbled it up and threw it away. And Daji said it would have been so much better if he didn't do that. Like I would be in better shape. He was shitting on Charji for doing that. But Daji immediately started, Daji was from a part of the country, Gujarati, where they're known for being business people and have poor characters. Now, they're not known to be spiritual people. And he embraced the business part. He became a big ego, and he fell. Like he had the ability to become that, what he was made into a spiritual master, and it just didn't take. And Charji, his mom died when he was 5, and he suffered all this stuff to do with that and his family. His dad went blind in one eye, and he had all these issues. And Charji had a rough life going into being the master of the system, and then he was targeted and hated upon, and all these people made it hard on him and tried to kill him and all this shit. And then he had this one thing. He wanted to die. He was physically just worn out, and he had this one thing, which is to leave the mission in capable hands. And he has this piece of shit that Daji, who just failed epically, right? And then shit all over him. Like, the disciple is supposed to have this gratitude for the master of the system. And Daji's tried to undermine him and done all this stuff, right? And so, to answer this person's question, let's go back to see if I can find it here again. I have it. Here it is. Paul, why was Kamlesh Patel allowed to happen? Why was he put forward only then to go and actively destroy the system? And so my theory about this is this, that there was not a person that could have successfully followed Charji as master of the system. When Lalaji died, there was 200 people, like I said, and no money, no property. And when Babaji died, there was 5,000 people. There's an ashram that was built in his hometown of Shah Jahanpur, not worth all that much money. And 5,000, 10,000 people globally, depending on how you want to, count them in terms of their sincerity or anything else, right? And so, there wasn't a lot there. And it's still, they were willing to kill Charji over it, right? And so they had these inner circle people. Some of them are corrupt. There had been issues, like all these things start infiltrating into the system and the level of humanity. And there wasn't anybody strong enough, who could have dealt with all these issues and taken over the mission that was now had, there's like $1 billion worth of properties and 100,000 people globally. And people start looking at that shit, right? I mean, when you get successful, then the vultures come in, and the corruption comes in, right? Whenever you go to a certain level, you have to deal with that stuff. Monetizing, people get big egos, all these kind of things. Again, a system that's always been for free, and people see that, and like they want a piece of that shit, right? They see that there's a powerful message. Politicians now are showing up the ashram with Kamlesh. These people want a piece of this thing. Like the Prime Minister of India showed up, right, and went to the ashram, and famous people. They want access to the audience. Sadhguru has even more famous people, right? He's interviewing with these people, Joe Rogan and whoever. Theo Vaughn, these people, right? They have, the Deepak Chopra, who was a partner with Daji on something. And so it becomes materialistic, and it's hard for people to fight that off, right? I mean, there's death threats and things and whatever, and just all this stuff. And so I can't think of one person that could have done this job. It had to be as an Indian man, too. Like that would be, in India, where the majority of people do this, that would be the prerequisite. So, but even, in that globally, I don't know. I know all the people, and some of them are great and sweet people, but they don't have, the fire and the fight to, fight off some of the shit, right? Like Chargy could be intimidating. He's this big guy, he had a gruff voice, and, he had power and his presence. And, it took him years to develop into who he was. And he was at his peak spiritually. And he had people who loved him and viewed him as this, otherworldly being, this divine master. A person would have been starting off from scratch. And even if that person had the potential to be great, they wouldn't do well. They wouldn't fare well in comparison. Like even my brother, who's still very loyal to Daji, would say this stuff. Like it would be hard to follow Chargy. And, maybe the mission had to suffer something. I mean, given the time and all these things, I don't know. Like my one hope about it is that, it survived a gap between when Lalaji died and when Babaji was named the successor, 13 years. It can survive something else like that until maybe after the apocalypse, when people are more motivated for spirituality than they are for materialism. And so, with that, maybe there's something there. I mean, it's just a hope that I have there's not really much evidence because there was never supposed to be this. Like there was supposed to be, a good successor after good successor. The system was supposed to be around for 10,000 years. But Babaji said that there were going to be massive changes at times, that the thing was going to have to reinvent itself. And the organization, was not always going to be the same. And it certainly isn't now. Daji brought in this thing, heartfulness. And so either he just shit the bed, he was supposed to be better than he was, he just failed, or this was part of a plan. There's only two options here. It's either one or the other, and I can't say which. I'm going to skip the terrorist thing till next time I have some videos up. It seems like it's still a developing story. Like he's canceled some, and he released some, and, it's going back and forth. And I got some outdoor work to do. It's getting late. It's a long video. So to tie this thing together, with the Kamlesh and the Trump thing, you don't know what's going to happen until somebody takes the position. Like, I don't know, in terms of one's ability in etheric form when you're not in a body to see the future, because time is cyclical. You're beyond the fourth dimension of time. And so everything has happened, right? Like it's already, everything in eternity has already happened. Like you have access to any part of the timeline because it's not linear. It's not really a line. And so, when you're on planet Earth, time moves in a linear fashion in the physical world, right? But in your etheric body, that's why you can go back and have a memory. You can have visual memory. You can close your eyes and, see an event that happened in the past. You can see you can remember your dead relative's face, right? somebody who died, you can picture their face in your mind, or, remember something that happened. How are you able to do that? Like, you have some sort of recorded aspect of it. Even these video recordings of events, you're seeing something that happened in the past, in the present. And so, the future is something that you don't have as much access to in your physical body, but people see the future, have, moments of, deja vu and things like this, predictions, premonitions and things. So, time has already all happened. Like, the whole eternity has already happened from the beginning to the end, but we're at a specific point in our physical body on the timeline. And again, online only because of our experience when we're in third dimensional reality. But until something happens, it really hasn't happened yet. We might feel it, we might know it's coming, all these things. But, we have to sometimes just go through something. Oh, we always have to go through something, regardless. And so during Trump's first term, I thought he was going to be a warmonger. He was talking tough. He wanted to do a North Korea-style military parade for his inauguration. Remember all that bullshit? But it turned out that he wasn't really into war. And, like with Trump, he promises a lot of different things, often contradictory things to different people. He says a bunch of things, and you never know what he's going to do. And he might change his mind at the last moment. Like, he's very impulsive. He's not thoughtful. He's not researched. He's not meticulous. He makes rash decisions. And so you never know what this guy's going to do. Like, we didn't know what his second term was going to look like. But we now know that he's going full Trump. He's going to try everything. He's going to throw everything up against the wall, whether it be tariffs, and we'll get into this stuff later. And he's going to, he's willing to deceive Americans. And, when he did that Gaza Strip thing, I wanted to point this thing out. When he did this Gaza Strip video thing, there's a copyright on it. These people, it's their intellectual property. And he didn't give them credit because they're not Trumpers. And they're actually mocking him. So he didn't want people to know that, especially his supporters, that it was, it's such a fucked up thing. But, there's rules to this shit, right? I said this about Dodgy, that there's literary rules. I have written some books, and I had to understand all these aspects of, authorship, and, I had to use these Adobe has these various, Adobe Audition and Adobe Premiere Pro and these tools, Photoshop, right? And they have, I think it's called InDesign, that I use to publish my books, right? And you have to understand, like, how to publish something. There's a blank page before, there's all these things you have to do with the book to make it so that a library will accept it, for example. Like, there's rules to it. And Kamlesh Patel's first book, The Heartfulness Way, there is a guy named Josh Patel, Josh Pollock, who, I liked, is somebody I knew, and we had a number of conversations when I was in India. And he worked for Kamlesh at his pharmacies, and he just thought Kamlesh was great. And Kamlesh was his preceptor, and they had these conversations where Kamlesh explained the Sajmark system, which became the book The Heartfulness Way, when Kamlesh changed the name to Heartfulness. But it was a book written by Josh, and Kamlesh was the subject, right? Kamlesh was being interviewed by Josh. But when you look at the book, Kamlesh's name as author is much bigger than Josh's. And then he wrote this book called Spiritual Anatomy, in which he dumped a bunch of his notes and diary writings and scribblings and bullshit stories. And he had a team of 15 different copyright editors and people within the mission that put it together into some sloppy, shitty book, right? And it was ghostwritten. And, it wasn't something you can get away with doing unless you say ghostwritten by so-and-so. Or like, there's a team of people. Like, it was some of his creative material, but a lot of it were, the teachings and a lot of what he publishes, the teachings and discoveries by Babaji and things that Charji said in talks. And, they're their teachings and their original ideas. And so there are rules to this shit, right? Just with like the same thing with Trump and taking this video. Like, as someone who's supposed to be, a law-abiding citizen, he's taking these guys' copyright material, for an unintended purpose and put it up like it's a promotional video of what he's going to do in Gaza. And it's so fucked up on one level, but then he's breaking rules on top of it because he thinks he's manifest destiny and he can do whatever he wants. The rules don't apply to him, which they should apply more to him than anybody else. When you are in power, then, you know, if you want everyone else to be rule obeyers, then you have to be meticulous about obeying the rules. But Trump doesn't do that, right? And he just, you know, tries these random things, and we're going to see this with the tariffs, and there's going to be an outcome. And I can tell right now there's going to, you know, he might have a lot of success. Even if 90% of what he does is successful, the other 10% is going to be a fucking disaster. And it's going to be more than 10, but it just takes one mistake of this type to take the whole system and bring it down. Anyways, let me wrap this one up here, and I'll continue on with my next video. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely important for the apocalypse and the ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.